I'm Sherlock Holmes, and I always work alone because no one else can compete with my massive intellect.
Hello everyone, this is the second episode of the Sherlock Rewatch, and in this episode we're going to be covering The Blind Banker. The Blind Banker was directed by Euros Lyn, written by Stephen Thompson, and came out on August 1st, 2010. Now, I quite liked the story of The Blind Banker. I felt it was much more compact and much more, wouldn't say interesting, but much more different from The Study in Pink, and I think that's what this episode is. A little different than the rest of the show. It has a very good opening, very creepy, very mysterious, where we get introduced to Sue Lynn, and she pulls down the drape over the statue, and she looks terrified. I was very intrigued from the start. And of course the hilarious scene with John at the grocery market while Sherlock is fighting the guy. That was hilarious. It was fun. It was an exciting way to open up an episode. Like, this is what it's gonna be like. But then the rest of the episode isn't all that exciting, in my opinion. It's a good mystery, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's great, and it could have been better. I think it's better than the Cabbie because it's more complicated and has a lot more layers to it. And I love the yellow symbols with the spray paint. That was very interesting, and the whole time I was trying to figure out what they meant. And it has good twists, too, but I also think it has a lot of boring moments, and sometimes the episode slows down, and every once in a while it got a little confusing, like I got a little lost, but that could just be me. It could have been more clear, or maybe you could have felt like you were more on the ride like you were with the first one, even though it's more interesting and more complex and has more layers. But overall, it makes it a little less fun. Now, the side plot with Sue Lynn and Andy, the boy who has a crush on her, is very interesting and very cute. I wanted to see more of it. It was left very open and very, they just completely, forgot about it. It was slightly disappointing. The use of both of their characters was slightly disappointing in the story. Now, the side plot with John and Sarah, however, I thought was lovely. I thought it was cute. I thought it was funny. I thought it added depth to John's character and this new character that we got to know, Sarah. And it was very well written for the story. The only problem I would have with that side plot is that it has a huge, 15-minute break in between, so you kind of forget about her, and then you're like, oh yeah, she exists. What the episode does do well, though, is drama and dramatic moments. I thought it was a very shocking moment when Sherlock found Van Koon dead, traumatizing when we see the second victim about to be killed. That was really dramatic. And the whole episode has this dramatic sense to it that I think is a little more interesting. Another thing I think this episode does well, and I actually think it probably does better than the rest of the show, is humor. This is one of the funniest episodes, or at least it has a lot of memorable moments, a lot of funny moments, and I can name a bunch right now, but I don't want to get into them all, but here are a couple examples. The graffiti scene, when Sherlock goes to meet that guy who does the graffiti, and it shows that Sherlock actually does understand parts of the city, and he's been around in the city, kind of similar to how he needs to remember London again in the Series 3 trailer. But in that graffiti scene, when John is blamed for the graffiti, and then the little humor you get afterwards, the opening of this video, when John is ranting to Sherlock and not opening the door while he's being choked to death, they saying that was absolutely hilarious as well. It made it funny, even though it was a horrible moment. So props for them balancing humor and drama. Now, it was a very dark and dramatic scene with Sue Lynn when Sherlock and John find her in the museum moments before her death. When the story chooses to kill this character off, you are sad, but I didn't really get any shock. It was more of a sob story, and then, oh, well, there she goes. And I shouldn't have to think that way in an episode. I will say, though, the shooting sequence when Sherlock is running away from the gunner in the museum was very traumatic. When John wants to go help him, you hear the gunshot, and he goes and finds Sue Lynn dead. That was filmed very well. But this leads to one of my, weirdest problems of the episode. I understand John's loyalty to Sherlock. I thought it was way too odd and strange for him to just leave Sue Lynn defenseless. As soon as that happened, I knew Sue Lynn was gonna die. The story didn't give you time to grieve or care. It was just, oh, she's dead. Immediately it goes from her death to the explaining of her death. So in the end, it was just a sad, cliche death. The book scene was good when they had to read through all the books to see the first word of the 15th page. That was interesting. It was funny. It was well written, but it was even funnier when the next day John was sleeping on the job. that was really good. Now the scene with the circus was hilarious at the beginning when Sherlock was the ultimate third wheel. It was very funny for him to not understand why John and Sarah were on this date, and the acting was really well done. But I will say that the actual circus scene, the guys trying to get out of the chains, it was really boring. It was slow. It wasn't interesting to me at all. And then the fight sequence happened. That was exciting. While I think they were trying to aim for it to be really interesting, I didn't think it was interesting at all. The foreshadowing for the Sherlock-John mix-up at the end was so well done. You saw little hints of people with cameras at the corner and people listening on John. And while that was kind of in the corner of your mind, you didn't really think about it too often. And then when the reveal happened that they thought that he was Sherlock Holmes was hilarious, and you get proof one by one why they think this, and it was very exciting, very well done, and you're laughing even though it's such a dark situation, which again brings into how good the comedic and the drama balance out in this episode. I do have to admit, it was a little dumb. The ending was slightly disappointing with the villain aspect anyway, not everything else. The villain aspect was disappointing because while it was funny, they weren't really all that threatening. They were just a gang of people who captured them. However, I love the ending. I love how Sherlock came and saved the day. He used his wits. He used his brain. I will say, like, the dramatic part where he's being choked and Sarah's about to get hit by the thing was very drawn out. The circus scene and this scene I felt like needed to just take a chill pill. With Moriarty and the Black Lotus leader speaking to each other on the computer was so eerie and creepy. When he gets the sniper to shoot her, we know that Moriarty is a threat and he's going to be the main character of the next episode, and it's great. Starting with Sherlock, he doesn't get too much development in this episode. We just get to see Sherlock, which is actually great. We got some great Sherlocky moments when he pretended to be somebody else talking through the doorbell, when he's deducing things again. And he's just being Sherlock, and I mean, this episode doesn't do anything to particularly advance on that. So in the end, it's not much development, but still he has amazing moments. Probably some of his best moments in the series.
Because the average human memory on visual matters is only 62% accurate.
Yeah, well, don't worry, I remember all of it.
Really?
Yeah, well, at least I would if I can get to my pockets. Took a photograph.
Now, with John's character, it's kind of odd because I feel like he's more of the main character in this episode. Again, like in A Study in Pink. Sort of his episode in a way. We see how his life now is financially. He needs to go get a job. He gets that job. His side plot kind of takes up most of the Sherlock stuff. We also get the sense that now that Sherlock is in his life, things will never be the same for him. But at the same time, things are better for him. He seems more alive in this episode. He seems to have gotten a lot more courage, considering he got the courage to flirt and ask out Sarah. I really do think Sherlock in his life did help that. You can subtly see his guilt about Sue Lynn's death after she dies, very subtly, and Martin does a good job with that. But I still feel like that doesn't make up for, like, the huge strangeness that scene was handled overall. And it's kind of funny because he technically saves the day in the end when he knocks over the dart thing, and it hits the other guy, even though Sherlock came to save the day. Overall, I feel like this is odd because it's more centered on him again when in my opinion, this episode should have been more focused on Sherlock, as much as I love John. Now, Sue Lynn was likable, but very weak in development. She had a good mystery going for her, but then she just kind of explained her story like the last second, and then they just kill her off. I feel like we didn't get enough time with her to really care so much about her death. It did hit me at first. It was really bad, but then in the end, it just ended up being a cliche death. Her backstory was very interesting, but in the end, she was just there. I really liked Sarah. I thought she was a really good character in this episode, and I felt like, in general, it's tragic because I thought she should have been used more in the series. I actually thought she was going to be the show's Mary, because this is the second episode of the show, and just like The Sign of 4 is the second book of Sherlock, John and Mary meet. I thought that she was Mary, but obviously we know that's not the case. Whether she would be with or not be with John wasn't really the problem, though. I liked her as a character. They just kind of threw her to the side, forgot she existed. She became the damsel in distress in the last second, and then when we see her briefly in the next episode, it's nice. This is getting a little too ahead of myself, but when she's just completely cut from the show, and she's just like a passing glance, like, oh, I broke up with her a while ago. Her relationship with John was done very well. It was fun. She's a lovely character, and they just wasted her. That's another problem I have with this episode, the mistreatment for these characters. Which brings me to the biggest problem of the episode. Where the heck is Lestrade? This is clearly an episode where they were trying to try new things out, testing the waters with, like, new things they should do. No. No. Don't get me wrong, I like the actor who plays Dimmick, but Dimmick is just, like, such a stupid character. He's just annoying. With Lestrade, you know that he has a connection with Sherlock. With this guy, he's just being there to be annoying, and it's not fun to watch. The episode was shot a little differently than the others too, partially because this is a different director, somebody that's worked on, like, Doctor Who and other things. And I think it's done very well, like, but you can tell it's different from the rest of the show. How good the episode is with the environments around them, all the locations they go to. They go to Chinatown, and they go to this museum. You know, we also have the bank and the graffiti cycling area. All of these new locations give us a sense of world building. They're interesting places, I think, and while I think some future episodes do a better job at it, this is our first look at outside more of London than the first episode does, definitely. I like the one particular cut where the second victim is about to be killed and it zooms in on his face. The text on the screen is a lot more fun in this episode too, because you have symbols floating around when they're thinking about it, so every once in a while you get, like, the Chinese symbols floating around and the words when they're looking through the book. The only problem I would have with the visuals is the overextension of some scenes, like trying to play out something more dramatic than it actually really is. I don't have too much else to say on this episode's visuals. Everything I just mentioned is really all I could say is what particularly stood out. Now, the Chinese influence on the music is actually really interesting, and I think overall that the music in this episode is very good. It really mixes things up and makes it different from the last episode, like I guess this whole episode does. There are some very quiet and very relaxed scenes which are necessary, but then there are other times when the music is very tense, very on key, and it makes everything so much more scary. But overall, I'll say the music is pretty slow and not too interesting. The sound effects are done really well, though. One particular scene is when John and Sherlock are searching through the dark alleyways for the graffiti on the walls. That has some really cool background music and some really cool sound effects. But the best part of the music in this episode, I have to say, is the music that comes before the death of a victim. That and Sulin's death music, when she died in that entire museum scene, it really fit the emotional weight of what just happened. It's relaxing, but it's like despair relaxed. The music matched the episode perfectly, but you know, it has to match the episode perfectly. And overall, was the episode that amazing? Overall, it felt like with The Blind Banker that they were trying something new, but they should have stuck with what they already had in A Study in Pink, at least tone and formula-wise. It feels more rather like an episode rather than the films that all the other Sherlock episodes feel like. However, it does have very, very memorable scenes, and it's arguably the funniest Sherlock episode. But it's funny how with all these memorable scenes, it can't come together and be a memorable episode. I think what this episode suffers from the most is how much better the show got after it, and how The Great Game, the next episode, managed to have all these mysteries in it that were just as interesting as this one in so much less time. This is, unfortunately, my least favorite episode.
Yes, well...
Oh, it's good. It suits you better this way.
But I have to stress again that this doesn't mean I didn't like the episode. In fact, at the time, I loved it. I really did. But once you compare this to the other ones, it's just not comparable. If you like these reviews, then you can subscribe, and you can check out my other reviews on my channel. Bye!